Hello, everyone. Welcome to Ask the Grant Writing Expert. I'm Dr. Meg Bouvier. You know me as the creator of your library of NIH grantsmanship courses, and I have over 35 years of experience at NIH as an applicant, an intramural researcher, a staff writer, and now as a full-time NIH grant writer, editor, and mentor. And I've helped clients land over $500 million in federal funding, and I'm here to answer your questions. So grab a cup of coffee and let's get started. So if you're attending live, remember that you're in listen-only mode. You can ask questions via, if you look at the toolbar, there's a Q&A box. Feel free to put your questions in there. And we'll be answering questions as we go along. There's also a chat box. So if you have a comment or something that you want to share with the other attendees, feel free to put it there. If you are watching this as a recording, because these recordings are posted on our YouTube channel and time-stamped by topic, just a reminder and a bit of a caveat that things change very quickly in federal grantsmanship. So whatever we say today is true to the best of our knowledge as of June 14th, 2023. So, but always check to make sure that everything is still current. It is my great pleasure to welcome back as a guest, Emilie Clemmens. So Emillie is a person who was a scientific review officer at CDMRP, which is the Army's biomedical research branch, and recently left to start her own company. And I'm delighted to have her come and talk about biomedical research funding through CDMRP. So Emillie, you want to tell people a little bit about yourself?
Yes, thank you so much, Meg, for the opportunity. It's a delight to be back. I always enjoy talking about CDMRP. By way of introducing myself, I'm going to go ahead and launch into my slide deck because I have a few data points there about myself. Let's see if we can get that to work. And go to slideshow mode. Okay, I think we've got it now. Okay, so as Meg mentioned, I'm here to talk about CDMRP, which is the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Programs, which is funded by the Army through the Department of Defense, of course. And a little bit about myself. You've got the bullet points there, but I would summarize it to say that I have a doctorate in in bioengineering, so a strong background in both life sciences and engineering. And I spent over 5 years managing peer review for CDMRP. And I began to see patterns in both how the reviewers were scoring the applications and patterns in the types of applications that were sent in. And I decided to leverage that expertise by leaving that position and founding Artemis Editing in 2021 to help people overcome, clear some of those hurdles to funding and writing better grant applications with a specific expertise, of course, in the CDMRP space. Okay, so for those of you who are unfamiliar with CDMRP, I'm kind of giving you a little bit already by way of introduction. It's about 30 years old, and it has been appropriated over $16 billion by Congress. And so you can see right away, it's a much smaller piece of the federal funding pie than NIH, but it has a unique purview. And this really began with its history. So in 1992, Congress was lobbied by a group of breast cancer patient advocates for funding that would result in therapies that would get faster and that would get to the patient faster and that would be more impactful. They were frustrated by the pace of research in the field. And so that really was the impetus. That was the beginning. And CDMRP was born. And so from that beginning, it has taken its mission and vision, which is to fund those areas that are not perhaps getting the funding that some other areas are getting. So looking for those areas of unmet need, but also trying to fund the high risk, high reward stuff that is has not traditionally been the purview of the NIH, which funds more incremental research. And so you can see some of the quotes there from the CDMRP website: investing in groundbreaking research and targeting critical gaps. So looking for stuff that's innovative and potentially quickly impactful. Another distinction is that the landscape for the portfolio at CDMRP is continually changing, whereas at NIH you have sort of an expected portfolio, although certainly new things arise. Every single year, the DoD is looking at what they funded last year, where the unmet needs are, where their highest priorities are, and they're changing what they fund from year to year. And they look at not only the DoD portfolio and the needs where they assess the needs to be, but they're also responding to continued advocate lobbying. So every year the patient advocacy groups are going to Congress and asking for money. Congress is deciding who's going to get which programs, which fields should be funded, and then the DoD sort of sets their priorities based on those two factors. So this can be frustrating, of course, because you don't know if your field is going to be funded from year to year. So I have included a link there for a listserv so you can follow the DoD priorities at CDMRP and see how they're changing. Another interesting and key distinction is that the patient advocates not only affect the funding allocations on the front end, but they're also affecting them on the back end by participating in the peer review process. So all of the CDMRP panels include consumer reviewers, which are patients, survivors, or caregivers, and they are providing feedback on what they feel the impact of the proposed research will be to patients. And they do participate in scoring. So something to keep in mind. So one reason I feel like that CDMRP is often overlooked is because there perhaps is a misconception that it is only funding medical research that's relevant to the soldier. And this is not the case for CDMRP. So I've just included a table here. It's separated into the next two slides where you can review the types of topic areas that are funded by CDMRP, and you can see when they've been funded and how much money they've been appropriated over the years that CDMRP has been active. So again, there are some that areas you might expect, such as combat readiness, but there are others that you might not expect, such as autism and epilepsy. Looks like we have a question or a raised hand.
Oh, there is a raised hand. So Lonnie,
just invite them.
Oh, that may have been an accident.
Oh, okay, I'll go on. But if there's a question in the Q&A.
Yeah, and just so people know, Emilie's bio is in the chat. So if you want to learn more about her website is there as well.
Thank you. Okay, so this is the second field where you can see, again, some of those topic areas that CDMRP funds. And I put one in bold because there is another umbrella program underneath the larger CDMRP umbrella. So if you don't see a topic area that fits your research, taking a look at the next slide. So the next slide is the subtopics for FY22 for what's called the PRMRP, or peer-reviewed medical research program. So you can see there are even additional areas, some probably surprising in terms of what is funded by CDMRP. So everything from arthritis to endometriosis to pulmonary fibrosis, and probably other areas that you weren't aware that the DoD funds.
And I just want to pause there. Part of the reason that I invite people who have expertise in other agencies is because a lot of you apply in these areas at NIH. And because everybody knows that you can't have the same science and review at two different places at NIH at once, but you absolutely can have the same science and review at two different federal agencies at once. So you could, if any of these topic areas apply to you, you could write them up as an NIH application and a CDMRP application and submit them simultaneously. And the SROs and program officers, may you be so lucky to land them both. If you do, they will be part of the conversation about how to handle the funding situation. Sometimes they divide the project. Sometimes there's a one aim of an R01 might get funded through another agency. It is not at all uncommon to submit in parallel. And for people who are early in their career, I strongly recommend that they shotgun in this way. So once you write up, it takes so much work to write up an R01. Once you do that, think of ways that you can break pieces off and send them to other federal agencies and private foundations to get your hands on some money to move the project forward, so that even if the R01 isn't funded, you're getting some funding and you're moving your project forward, which ultimately will make you more competitive on the resubmission. So as you're looking at these things, as Emily said, there are surprises in here. I'm always surprised in DoD in general. I'm always surprised at the breadth of the topics that they cover in terms of biomedical research.
And if I can add to that too, in addition to thinking about how you can apply in parallel, you may have an area of your research that is particularly incremental, and you might look to the NIH for that funding, but you may be thinking, gosh, I wish I could get some funding to do this crazy piece over here, that maybe is a little bit of an aside, and then really start looking at the CDMRP, for that piece. I think that's a great way to consider how you might get funding through CDMRP.
Yeah, NIH is often accused of funding next logical steps research. So I really appreciate you saying this, because there are not many federal agencies that do fund things that are a little more outside the box. Usually you have to go to private foundations for that. But it's really interesting to me that they do this as well. So we do have a question. I may have missed this, or you may talk about this later in the slides, but are the budgets comparable to R01s?
Well, I am going to talk about that a bit. And so if you could hold that question, I'm going to launch into it just very shortly. So I'll go back really quickly. This image is just brief, just to show you that the amount of congressional appropriations for CDMRP as a whole has been rising and is continuing to rise. Okay, so just one brief aside. The Army does, of course, fund medical research that is specific to defense. So I'm not going to talk about this anymore. Just want to make you aware, in case you might have some areas in which you feel like in those 6 core research areas that are listed there, that your research might apply. So this is another avenue for you. Okay, so this is a kind of complicated image of the program cycle for CDMRP. I'm not going to go into the details here, but please do look at it and let me know if you have questions. I want to talk about funding opportunities really, really quickly. And this relates to the question that we have. So briefly, when did the funding opportunities come out? They start coming out in the spring, but they sprinkle out. So another distinction from NIH, there's not a regular triple release date and triple due date across the fiscal year. Each one of these areas has its own program. So for example, there'll be the ovarian cancer research program or the osteoporosis research program. Each one of those programs releases their own funding opportunities. And so the due dates are set by the individual programs underneath the CDMRP umbrella. So a lot to keep track of, but since you're probably only operating in 1 or 2 of the areas, you really only need to find out when the due dates are for your specific program.
Oh, so
again, I have some
within a program, like
yes.
Okay, got you. All right.
And the funding opportunity, there are BAAs, broad agency announcements within the DoD, but that is also typically not part of CDMRP. So there's DoD BAAs, but we're not talking about those today. So the funding announcements, the funding opportunities that are released are program specific, and every single individual program decides what types of opportunities they are going to release. So they may have a clinical trial. One program may have a clinical trial funding opportunity and another may not. So each program decides what are their priorities for that fiscal year. So here's some links where you can sign up, of course, to keep track of your topic area and to sign up for specific topic area releases. Okay, so some examples of the different types underneath the individual programs that I have seen. They have everything that really run the gamut. So here's some examples. There are discovery awards / idea development awards. So very early stage, I got a wild idea. I have no preliminary data. I just want to get this thing off the ground and see where we can take it. Fiscal year 21, they had awards that were 2 years and $200K. So again, small amount. Often postdocs are eligible for these awards, which is pretty exciting. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have clinical trial awards, which again are offered by some programs. And these often have no funding limits. They can be really large, or typically a 4-year time limit. There's a lot of stuff in between. And that one that's in between is a technology or therapeutic development award. So we're not at a clinical trial stage yet. We're working on a technology or a therapy, and we are in a preclinical stage and we need some funding. So you can see that, again, this depends on the program. How much money they're going to offer depends on the program, and what their particular things that they're interested in and their subtopics is going to be program specific. There are even larger awards too that are consortium awards, team science awards. So when you want to bring multi-institutions together to develop a program or to study a particular area, they have some programs offer those from year to year. But again, sometimes frustrating thing is there's not a consistency. It's just looking at each program looks at what their priorities are for that year, and that's what they offer.
So it seems like the awards can be pretty, they can really run the gamut from very small to very large. And, you know, like there's certainly somewhere in there would be something equivalent to an R01 in the multi-million.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. But there's not always an R01 style offered per program. It's pretty common. And those are called the Investigator Initiated Research Awards is what they're usually called, IIRAs. And they're comparable to R01s, but again, not every program is offering them every single year. So there's a 2-step review process for CDMRP. There's the peer review and the programmatic review. So just really going to touch on them briefly, and then I'll take your questions. So some distinctions from NIH. So peer review, mostly what you would expect. There's a lot of similarities to NIH. You have a group of your peers that are gathered in a room to look at this batch of applications and score it. The scoring is a little different, but here are some key differences. So there's no standing panels. So for every batch of applications, CDMRP is recruiting peers just for that batch of applications, and that's the extent of their involvement. They give the scores and it's done. A lot of the funding opportunities have pre-applications, not all, but a good portion of them have competitive pre-applications. So you have to submit and then be invited to submit the full. Some have just a simple letter of intent, which is not reviewed or judged or scored, just for planning purposes for them to be able to recruit the right people to the review panel. So each full application is typically assigned to 2 peer reviewers, also bringing back up the consumer reviewer. So all of the applications will be viewed by an advocate to comment on the impact. And then you have specialist reviewers that as needed. Other stuff is pretty standard. You know, the peer review process is rapid. So of course it's important to make an impression quickly and clearly. Okay, so I think I'm going to leave these for these slides on peer reviewer selection and on some details on the specific types of reviewers that they use for you to review on your own time. And certainly if you have questions, though, a lot of in terms of what wins in peer review for CDMRP, a lot of this is going to be the same as the same type of criteria as you would have for an NIH, with the exception of course, remembering their mission, which is the high risk, high reward, that you will often be asked to write an impact statement. And you have to, in some cases, you have to write a transition plan. So you need to show them how you're going to make an impact for patients and how you're going to make an impact quickly. So what is your plan to get this into the clinic quickly? And then the rest of this, again, I keep this for your review. Some of the patterns that I saw that would result in low scores. And I want to leave plenty of time for questions. So the last thing I want to mention is the programmatic review, which is different. So there is no pay line for CDMRP review. There is no score which guarantees that you will get funding. Once peer review is complete, the highest scoring applications are sent to the programmatic panel, which is also a panel of peers and DoD personnel who now will look at the highest scoring applications, and they will compare that to the DoD priorities for that particular program, and then they will select which ones they want to fund. So it is actually possible for a lower scoring application to be funded if it is a better match for DoD priorities than something that received a perfect score, for example, from the peer review process.
Technically, that's true for NIH as well. The program staff, it's not an absolute. That's a common misconception that people think that because there's a pay line, not all institutes publish a pay line, but program, it's a two-level review, very similar to what you've described, where it's peers and then a programmatic level of review. At the programmatic level of review at NIH, the program officers do decide together as a group. They will pick and choose and sometimes fund something that scored worse because it fits their priorities better. So
I see.
Yeah.
I see. Well, I don't want to spread any misconceptions, so it's good. Thank you. I learned that.
Very few people know this. Most applicants don't know it either, but it's definitely true.
Well, I guess maybe the one difference would be that the programmatic panel is like a second peer panel. So it's not the program officers. The program officers are involved in the process, but what they put together, this programmatic panel, the program officers put together the panel, which includes DoD personnel and the different peers than the ones that were in the peer review panel.
Yeah,
so
and
I don't know if that's a little different.
It's an advisory. It's part of the 3 times a year advisory panel. And another known fact is that there is a consumer community member on that panel. So they do have NIH. The community member does technically have a voice in the decision, but they are not front and center like they are at CDMRP. At CDMRP, it seems like they are one of your main assigned reviewers. That's not the case at NIH. It's very interesting.
Yeah, and having been in the room countless times, I can tell you it's absolutely true. The consumers are active participants in the discussion of the application, so they're not just sort of sitting on the sidelines giving a little checkbox. So, I guess my final notes are that even though we talked about applying in parallel, you do have to tailor your application to CDMRP priorities and to the funding announcement, of course, to be successful. So there is an adjustment. You can't just like shove that NIH application into in a door. You don't resubmit for CDMRP. You do get feedback, you get a summary statement, but you don't get an invitation to resubmit. You have to do a completely new submission in the following cycle. And that's my number one tip is of course, it's true for all, read the program announcement carefully and structure your application to match. And then there's my my own pitch. I'm excited to answer questions.
Yeah, let's leave that up. And I do want to say we had the one question about budget, and to the person who submitted that, if you still have questions about the budget, feel free to type those in. I think Emily did answer that, but if you have something more specific to ask, please be sure to ask that. And while we wait for people to type questions in, I have some questions. So, I'm always so interested to see how these things are different. So Are all of the funding opportunity announcements, are they all topic specific or no? Like, do they issue topics?
Yes,
Okay.
the funding opportunity announcements all, as I mentioned, come through the individual programs. So they are all underneath those, so much smaller umbrellas underneath the big umbrella. So if you're, looking for the kidney cancer research program, if that's your area, you go to their site under the CDMRP site and look for what opportunities are available for that particular program.
And each of those opportunities would be built around a topic, correct?
Well, what they do so I think I understand your question better now. So in the announcements, you will see they either call them focus areas or areas of encouragement. Some require you to apply under a specific focus area. So, under the kidney cancer research program, they might have 5 or 6 focus areas that they're looking for people to apply. And there may be a requirement for you to hit one of those. Some of the announcements say, it's okay if you don't. We're also interested in other ideas. So again, you got to read the announcement and see what that particular announcement's looking for. If it's an area of encouragement, that's not a mandate. And that's why they word it that way. That's like, these are the things we'd really like to see that we feel like are on our priority list, but we're open to other ideas. Obviously, since you have that programmatic panel review, it's a good idea to try to hit one of those focus areas or areas of encouragement to increase your likelihood of funding.
Okay, that's a little different from NIH too, because most of the applications that come into NIH are under investigator initiated parent announcements. So like the R01, where it's just come to us with an idea. We
Right.
do have another question here. Fascinating presentation. I grew up in the DoD community, but have never heard of this funding agency. Thank you for sharing this information. Does CDMRP give preferential status to ESI and new investigators the way NIH does? What a great question. Yeah, do they? So early stage investigators, are you familiar with what that means at NIH?
So ESI?
Yeah, so it's called early stage investigator status.
Oh, sure.
And basically it's a funding advantage given to people who have not yet gotten an R01 and are early in their career, 10 years or less from their terminal degree. So it's a way of helping them get their first R01.
Well, what I've seen is funding opportunities that are actually specifically targeted at early stage investigators. So not necessarily a preferential status underneath a particular funding opportunity, but specific opportunities to fund those individuals. So again, I'm going to sound a bit like a broken record, but it's going to depend on the fiscal year, and it's going to depend on if that program has prioritized that. So you will have a program that says, you know what, I feel like we need to support new ideas and new people. So let's put out an early stage investigator award. And so you'll, apply for those. But again, it's not consistent for every year. So however, you look at the eligibility under, let's say, the R01 type application, the IIRA, and they will encourage early stage investigators in many cases. But to my knowledge, there's not a preferential status. You will, so all these things are kind of popping up for me. So I have also seen, though, where there can be sort of 2 modes of an award, where it will be established investigator versus early stage investigator underneath one funding opportunity, and they will have a different requirement. So for the early stage, they may ask for a mentor component to be included in the application. Whereas if you're an established investigator, you don't have to submit that piece.
Yeah. We do have one more question, if it's okay, Emily. We'll try to answer it. I know we're at time. I am an assistant professor of biostats in the Department of Biomedical Informatics. My research interests include development of AI ML methods for weak signal detection in high dimension data with applications in omics data and radiomics MRI data. cupola-based approach for dependence of modeling, application cost-effective analysis for cluster randomized trial. I'm really new in grant submission and would like to get some advice on how to proceed to get funding. What type of grant would you suggest to me as a new faculty to get started?
That's a big question, isn't it? I think we both can start to comment on this. I mean, I think it's tricky if we're looking from the CDMRP lens. You would need to identify your clinical application area and then look to see if there are opportunities for AI ML and in the context of MRI and imaging underneath that umbrella, which there may well be. I think that those types of opportunities are going to be increasing in number, of course, with the amount of funding that's going up for AI and machine learning. But I think I'm going to guess Meg has some broader.
I have a broad response, but then somebody else gave an answer in the Q&A, which was very kind. So my broad response, I put in the chat box, go to the reporter website, report.nih.gov, and enter your PubMed style search terms, and look for things in the NIH portfolio that are funded that look somewhat similar, that are in your field. And that will begin the process of you learning about the NIH portfolio and who might fund that kind of work. And Julie, thank you so much. She put in here, please tell that person the K25 mechanism at NIH, quant focused training grant. So thank you very much for that, for that advice. So there's a K kiosk at NIH where you can learn about this. But if you just do an internet search on NIH K25, that will come up as well. So those are the two pieces of advice that I would give: NIH K25 and going to the reporter website. And I sense, Emily, that we have a lot more. I know I have a lot more questions for you, so I am going to invite you to come back. Emily and I will look at our calendars and see what we can come up with. And always a pleasure to have you. You're just a font of information about CDMRP, and I think there are so many opportunities outside NIH that I think biomedical researchers can and should be learning about. So I really appreciate you coming in and telling us a little bit about CDMRP. And I look forward to asking the rest of my questions, because I have so many questions about it as well. So thank you.
Absolutely. For joining us. Oh, thank you so much for having me. I hope that this was helpful. And of course, please contact me at the information that you can see on your screen or in the chat box if you have any further questions or want to discuss the CDMRP grant application process in more detail.
So thank you all for attending. If you missed any part of this or want to recommend it to anybody, we post these recordings on our YouTube channel. It's just under Bouvier Grant Group. It's not hard to find. We hope to see you next time, and we'll visit with Emily again and ask some more questions. So thank you, Emily, and thank you all for attending. Have a wonderful day and good luck with your grant writing. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.